Yep.
All right. Thanks everyone for coming out this evening. We will begin with an acknowledgement of country and then with prayer. So I invite Peter Collins for the acknowledgement of country.
Thank you, Leah. We acknowledge the Ngunnawal people on whose land we gather today. We acknowledge the sacredness of the land and of all life. We pay respects to Aboriginal peoples of the past, whose spirits remind us to be grateful for the gifts of water, air, fire, and earth. We pay our respects to all Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander elders, past, present, and emerging, as well as those present here today.
Our theme at St. Thomas Aquinas this year comes from the Gospel of Matthew. Ask and it will be given to you. Seek and you will find. Knock and the door will be open to you. We're going to explore our theme this year by looking to our patron saint, St. Thomas Aquinas. And I'd like to share a prayer that was shared with us and the staff today from our Year 1 team that comes from St. Thomas Aquinas. Grant me, O Lord, my God, a mind to seek you, wisdom to find you, conduct pleasing to you, faithful perseverance in waiting for you, and a hope of finally embracing you. I invite you now to say our school prayer with me. God, our Creator and loving Father, thank you for the gift of ourselves, the gift of each other, our family, and our friends. Bless us with the reverence for all created things. Jesus, our brother, help us to be kind and generous, caring and joyful. Guide us to walk in your footsteps, to think of others with a heart full of love, to see others as you see them, and to work together to create a community where everyone feels loved, welcomed, and at home. Holy Spirit of God, support us to love others and to love the world, so that our school will be a place of friends, family, laughter, learning, and fun. St. Thomas Aquinas, pray for us. In the name of the Father, Son, Holy Spirit. Amen.
Thank you, Sky. I want to welcome everyone here this evening. I know most of you already know who I am, Leah Taylor, principal of the school, but I do know that we have some people who are past parents and who are still members of our parish. So I welcome you here as well. I'd like to introduce some of the speakers who we have here today, and also representatives from Catholic Education and from ACT Government. So we have Mr. Ross Fox, who's the Director of Catholic Education. He's here with us today. We have Mr. Jeff Whitnell, who is the Senior Officer for Planning and Facilities with Catholic Education. Up the back, we have Dominic Braben, who is Performance Improvement Leader with Catholic Education, and we have Josie Thomas, who is the Senior Officer for Marketing and Communications, and they'll be monitoring the chat on Zoom, but they'll also be roving with the microphones when we move to questions. From ACT Government, we have Ms. Narelle Sargent, who is the head of the Environment and Protection Authority. We have Jeffrey Rutledge, who is the Deputy Director General of Environment Planning and Sustainable Development Directorate. We have Ms. Helen Milne, who is the Containment and Land Consultant with GHD. We have Michael Ulf, who is Community Engagement Officer with GHD, and we also have Ms. Penny Gibson, who is the Senior Communications and Engagement Officer with Environment Planning and Sustainable Development Directorate. Okay. So we have convened this meeting today to provide an opportunity for parents and for the community to hear more about the PFAS contamination that we have here at the school. And we've invited our experts from GHD and from ACT Government to respond to some of the questions that you have had, and also to go into details about the sorts of works that you might expect to see over the coming year. I'd like to thank those who have sent their questions through as part of that registration process. We will attempt to answer all of those questions as we speak, but if we haven't answered those questions, there will be an opportunity to ask more questions at the end of this. I do ask that you note those questions down, or just keep a record of those questions. There were paper and pencils available to you if you needed to grab that, and you didn't grab it on the way in, you're welcome to do that. But we will have that opportunity at the end. I would ask that you be respectful during that question time. We're here, we come with a spirit of discovery and with finding out. So if you can just be respectful of the people you are asking those questions of. I know 2020 was a very challenging year, with parents not being able to come onto site, with remote learning, with a global pandemic, and our community had the addition of the PFAS that we're managing as well. I want to thank all of our parent community for your support during last year in particular. I felt that as a principal coming into the school, I was very well supported by my community, so thank you for that. I do think it might be helpful to give you a little bit of an outline of what's happened to date in terms of the PFAS situation. So as you would be aware, the site adjacent to St Thomas Aquinas used to be a fire station, and it was in operation from 1981 through to 2013. During this time, PFAS was used as a firefighting foam. The site was sold in 2013, and in 2018 plans were developed to build a childcare centre on the site. An environmental management plan was also developed following the discovery of PFAS contamination on the site. And as part of this plan, further testing of the school site was required to be undertaken by the developer. In July 2018, the school raised questions with Catholic Education Facilities team about whether or not the school site should also be tested, given the close proximity to the former fire station. In the absence of testing by the developer, a consultant was engaged by Catholic Education to undertake the testing. Following the consultant's initial report, fencing was erected as a precautionary measure in mid-2019, pending further testing by the consultant. In October 2019, representatives from Catholic Education met with the EPA. This was the first of many meetings and a lot of correspondence that went back and forth during 2019, 2020, and continuing on to 2020-21. The meetings have led to the EPA issuing an order of assessment for a number of sites close to the former fire station and beyond the school. Community meetings with affected owners and tenants of the sites, and further investigation of the school and surrounding areas. During the meeting, an extensive correspondence about PFAS at the school, between the school, the territory and Catholic Education. meant that we have actually adopted a collaborative approach between the three organisations. And the school and Catholic education have been guided by the territory and their consultants, who are GHD, in terms of managing the site and the risk of the site. We've received personal assurance from Dr. Coleman on at least 2 occasions that the risk of adverse effects from PFAS for staff and students are extremely low at current levels, with a lasting picture that she left us at one meeting, that being that a child would need to eat an excessive amount of soil on a daily basis before it could result in any adverse impacts on child health or any health of anyone here on the site. We have a plan for remediating the playground as part of the broader management of the PFAS site. And we also look to improving the amenity of the site as well. There are some plans up on the wall, so if you didn't have an opportunity to see those, we do have some plans of what we will actually be doing as, to improve the amenity rather than simply remediate the site. While I understand that some of you have had reservations about timeframes, I can assure you that despite any overt action on the ground, the school, Catholic education, the territory and consultants have been working hard to progress a solid plan for addressing issues associated with the PFAS that will result in a sustainable fix for our school community in the future. I am excited to see the changes of the school landscape that will occur in the coming months. And not only for our school oval, but also with the construction of our new ELC. So you will actually see considerable amounts of building and of activity on our site. GHD have been working hard on developing a plan to remediate the soil and prepare the playground to be ready for full use by the students. They've also been working hard to ensure that the contaminated soil is appropriately encased. So what we are looking at doing is actually using a 300 millimetre, so we're going to lay down a geotextile to cap the layer. We'll then be putting in 300 mil of topsoil, and then we'll be putting down turf. And while we're doing that, we'll also be levelling out 3 playing fields so that students will actually have level soccer or football fields to play on. And we'll also be looking at introducing some tree cover and irrigation as well, so that the grass will be able to survive into the long term. We've engaged a civil contractor to assist us with this, and they're also going to be engaged for part of the construction of the ELC. So what we're looking is actually removing some of the soil that we will need to for the ELC a little earlier than we would ordinarily, so that we can actually place that in the affected area and we can encase all of that. So the whole site will have any of the contaminated soil will be encased as part of that process. During the development plan for this, Catholic education has been working, the school and Catholic education have been working very closely with GHD to ensure that whatever we do is actually going to comply and actually is actually going to encase the PFAS fully, and at various points in time, GHD will actually be coming to check and to have a look at that process so that we can all be assured that is safe. GHD has already discussed that they will require some risk mitigation measures in place throughout the process. They've requested things like water tanks to be present during the earth moving process to spray dirt down to minimise the spread of dust. Our civil contractor is aware of those requirements and is already ensuring that the requirements are met. In the next 6 to 12 months, there will be significant amounts of activity as the ground is prepared, the soil properly encased, and the soccer and football fields are developed and the ELC is constructed. Most of the fencing for these projects has already been erected. And so what you can see now is the area that the children are actually able to play in. We are monitoring these areas and monitoring the student play at these areas. At this stage, you'll be pleased to hear that all the students are cooperating well with each other. There's multiple games happening on soccer fields and football fields. And we haven't had any incident to date. So, and the children are actually celebrating this as well. We have a lot more students who are now taking up basketball and handball as another sport. But we will continue to monitor it. And if we do need to open up the grounds a little more for students, then there is some more ground available for students to play on. There will be some additional fencing that will go up as part of the construction for the ELC moves forward. But even with these areas fenced, we will still have sufficient space for the children to play in. As with all projects, they will take time. I'm an optimist. I am optimistic about timelines, but I really can't commit to an exact timeline as to when this will be completed. It's dependent on so many factors. So part of the fact, some of the factors are things like approvals, working with GHD to make sure that we are complying and doing what we should be doing, but also the weather. So I can't give a definite timeline with that. I do appreciate that there will be disruption associated with the activities, given the scale of the project, and also with the added challenge of and blessing, I suppose, of building the ELC. But I think by the time we are finished with all of this, we will have a beautiful ELC to open. We'll have lovely grounds, and I think a playground that the children and the community can be proud of. So. Sorry if I did stumble over that. I think I was given 10 minutes, but it's a lot of information to sort of disseminate in that time. I will hand over to Jeffrey Rutledge from ACT Government. He's going to talk about the ACT Government role in all of this.
Thanks, Leah, and good evening, everyone. So Jeffrey Rutledge, Deputy Director General, Environment Planning and Sustainable Development Directorate. The reason I'm here is the ACT Government has a number of touch points in this process, in that we were the ESA, we are the ESA. The Suburban Land Agency sold the site next door and put in place the appropriate measures for the childcare centre. We also have the Environment Protection Authority, and the Chief Health Officer wished to be here today but was unable to come. She's got a repatriation flight coming in the next couple of days from India. So her focus is quite rightly with COVID. But I think what we've seen in her 2 letters that she's already sent to the school community, it's her firm view that the level of risk is negligible, in that you would have to consume a lot of dirt, so much dirt that you would vomit before you'd be at trace. But I'll talk a little bit about where the ACT Government is, and I'll touch on PFAS a little bit, but then Helen will talk you through PFAS. And I'm happy to take questions, because I think once you both read the fact sheet that you picked up on the way in, you hear Helen's presentation, you'll probably have very specific questions, and we'll address those specifically. Just where we've found PFAS in Canberra, well, I should start by saying PFAS is everywhere. I'm sure everyone has a level of PFAS in their body right now, from accidental exposure, from exposure to Scotchgard, dry cleaning fluids, all of these things. There's about 4,000 chemicals that are grouped into PFAS. And so it exists in the community. Where the concern is raised, and is that if you have long-term exposure and a lot of it, and so a precautionary principle is taken. So the focus here is, it was a fire station, and there has been concerns raised by firefighters themselves. I know a gentleman in the Navy. He was in the Navy. They used to train in this stuff and swim in it. It was their diver training. So if you're in that sort of level of exposure, the concern is quite great. And where there is a direct line to a food source, or a direct line to a water source, potable water source, there's often a concern. Where we've found it in the ACT is here at the former fire station. There's 8 current and former ACT fire stations across Canberra that we're working on. Canberra Airport, West Belconnen Sewage Treatment Plant, the Resource Management Centre at West Belconnen, Sanford Street at Mitchell, fuel depots, Coppins Crossing, Queanbeyan Sewage Treatment Plant, and concrete recycling. I just list those to say that part of my role is to coordinate the ACT government's activity, not just at this site, but all of those other sites. And I also did the demolition. People might remember the fire training tower opposite Westfield on Lathlane Street. We had to do the safe demolition of that. And so we've done that and done the remediation work of that site. So that's been my role today. I think I'll probably just leave it there to hand over to Helen. And then, as I say, I'll answer any of your questions when we get to that part. Thanks, Helen.
Thank you very much. I've just got some notes on the computer here. Good evening. My name is Helen Milne. I'm a technical director at GHD. I've been working on this project since we took it on last year. I have nearly 20 years experience in the contaminated land industry in terms of the assessment of contaminated sites and the remediation of them, 10 years of which are in the UK and then just coming up 10 years in Australia. I'm going to run through the presentation here, just give a bit of background. A few things have crossed over, others have said, so I might skip through those slides, but yeah, I'll run through the site. Who's turning over? Sorry. Hi. So what is PFAS? This wheel that we've got here indicates how extensive PFAS is, where it's located, what it's located in. As indicated by Jeff, it's in a huge amount of materials that we come across every single day. There are over 3,000 compounds that are grouped in the classification of PFAS. They're widely used. They're very soluble or highly soluble in water and very mobile in the environment. Additionally, in the environment, they're also very persistent, which is unusual in the world of contaminants to have all of those characteristics. There's ongoing international research into the toxicity and the chemical properties of PFAS. It is classified as an emerging contaminant, so the information is changing frequently. The most well-known PFASs are 3 compounds called PFOS, PFOA, and PFHX. I've just extracted a paragraph from the guidelines around PFAS assessment. It's the PFAS National Environment Management Plan, version 2, pardon. Oh, sorry, next slide. Two slides on, sorry. Not very good. Okay. This is called the NEMP or NEMP 2.0. It indicates that PFAS contamination or PFAS, a site can have PFAS contamination or be PFAS contaminated. And it's where PFAS is reported under laboratory conditions at detectable levels in the environment. It doesn't reflect the fact that PFAS may be a risk. So it can be there, it may not be a risk. The presence of PFAS, the risk depends on a range of factors in PFAS, where it's present, its leachability, its concentration, how often you're exposed to it, how you're exposed to it, what kind of receptor you are, whether you're human or ecological, what environmental value the ecosystem may have. It has the potential to bioaccumulate in organisms, so we need to consider food substances and all different types of environmental media, so in terms of water and soil, sediments, etc. Next slide. I'm just going to run through a very quick snapshot of the regulations. As reiterated earlier, there's the NEMP 2.0, which was developed by the EPAs in Australia and New Zealand. And there's also the NEPM, which is the broader assessment guidance that we use for the assessment of contaminated land. Also, I note that the site, which is the former fire station, which is block 22, and the land around block 22, which is block 14, which is the school, has an order on it that was issued by the EPA in December 2019, which is an investigation order to assess the source, nature, and extent of the PFAS that was originally that came from the former fire station. So our site, in the overview of the history, Leah went through most of this, so I won't go through in great detail. But the source site, which was the former fire station, was in operation between 1980s and 2013. AFFF, which is the firefighting foams used on the fire stations, contain the PFAS compounds. The use of PFAS on the fire station and the land surrounding the fire station, which is now the playing fields, was from fire making and spraying activities in close proximity and potentially slightly further away from the fire station. The site, as in the primary school, was first investigated back in 2018. Next slide. So the contamination assessment is very well defined in how you go about contamination assessment. You look at preliminary site investigations where you look at the site history, the geology, the environmental setting. You talk to former workers of this facility and people that know about the area to sort of understand what the contamination sources are, where they were, and how it was, how it might have got into the environment. We did a preliminary assessment back in March 2020, which was the final version, which also included a sampling and analysis plan. This was then, we did our first investigation, I think it was March 2020, and we did a second investigation in August 2020. So the final investigation reports were prepared and issued in October. I will go into more detail about what they contained in due course. As an output of the detailed site investigation, where you take the physical samples, we prepared the site interim management plan, which Leah was discussing earlier. And that is what is being put into practice at the moment. Currently, GHD are also preparing a site-specific health assessment for the site, and this is a study which looks at the way that the land is used, and we come up with site-specific criteria for the amount of PFAS you can have in soil or groundwater, etc., on a particular property. Once that's completed, we will verify that the management plans that have been put in place are appropriate. That's due to be completed in early March 2021. A note on the side there that as part of the order and as part of the process of looking at PFAS, the site is under independent review and audit by an independent ACT EPA accredited site auditor. They've reviewed all the documentation that we have prepared and have been happy with everything that's been produced and have signed that off. They will be, as part of the process all the way through, as well as a peer review body, as well as the ACT EPA. So the investigations conducted by GHD have been focused on land around the former fire station. We've assessed the school, the church, ovals in the near proximity, the surrounding area, public reserves, stormwater channels, and also down into Ginninderra Creek. We've looked at soil, groundwater, and surface water in terms of environmental media. Just a sort of very quick summary of investigation numbers. I don't want to bore you too much, but on site, the initial investigation included 16 soil bores, and I can show you the locations of those shortly. 1 groundwater well, and we took appropriate soil and groundwater analysis of those locations. Based on the findings of that, we came back and did a further event to sort of delineate some contamination that we found, which included some additional soil bores and a further round of groundwater monitoring. Off-site, and just for information purposes, really, we've also done a number of locations, again, soil, groundwater, surface water, because the issue, PFAS, as I said earlier, does migrate. So we have been looking further afield than just the school. Next slide. This is probably a little bit busy and very hard to read, but it sort of shows you the location of the preliminary soil investigation. It doesn't include the location of the bores undertaken back in 2018, but most of those were inside the blue rectangle area that you can see annotated on that plan. The investigation that we identified, we found 2 locations. One was borehole 105, which is located in the blue triangle. And then there's another location, BH126, which is located near where the new early learning centre is going to be. Those 2 locations were above the residential health screening levels, which we used as a preliminary screen to assess the potential risk to the occupiers of the school or the users of the school. The highest concentration that we have was recorded was 1,200 micrograms per kilogram or 1.2 milligrams per kilogram. So it's 1,000 times above the screening criteria that we used. Most of the PFAS sort of sits in the top surface of the ground, just underneath the grass layer or near surface, and it does deplete with depth, and it was consistent in the follow-on event. So as you can see in this picture here, there was a follow-on investigation to delineate the main contamination, well, the highest contamination in the area of the proposed early learning centre. And we found some further contamination in that area above health investigation criteria. So we've now got quite a defined investigation area, and it does extend up to about 2 meters below ground level. I know there's some questions about water and things that we came through, so I've added some water slides in here. There's 2 rounds of groundwater monitoring that we've undertaken. We've only got 1 groundwater well on the school site. Groundwater sits about 8 to 10 meters below ground level. So the likelihood of somebody from the school site using or touching or coming into contact with groundwater is very, very low. But as part of the assessment, we've looked at that to look at all options and pathways for PFAS. The concentrations of PFAS that we've found do exceed drinking water criteria, but it's worthy of note that there is no possible water source use in the area or within quite a large area of the site. So we don't think this is an issue. It's more of a screening process. Surface water, next one. Sorry, yeah, next one. So again, these are off-site. These are generally pooled water bodies that appear after heavy rain. So I think we've only got 1 event of these because rain isn't always there and the pools aren't always there. The concentrations that we've got are exceeding ecological screening criteria. There is no risk from human health from these locations. Next one. So in contaminated land assessment, you look at a source pathway receptor linkage. Based on the results that we have here and the way that the site is used as a school, there is, as a precautionary approach, we have put in interim management measures as there has been some exceedances of our preliminary screening criteria. So as a result, we consider there is potential on a very conservative approach that there is potential for direct contact with soil and ingestion of soil. But I wanted to reiterate that the criteria used are very based on a residential scenario where you're growing vegetables in a garden and you're eating those vegetables, and the pathway really driving the number that we've used is for eating the vegetables that would from a garden scenario, not from the dirt. And that's the reason we're doing a health risk assessment. So we're looking at it in a more site-specific manner. Based on the findings of our investigations and those previously undertaken, we've identified an L-shaped area of, oh, sorry, the next slide. An L-shaped area of land that you can see on the playing fields is being fenced off. These are the areas, as a precaution, we have recommended to be fenced off. We came up with a number of options to manage the contamination while we are doing our further risk assessments. One is a physical barrier such as a fence, and which has been installed. This is to prevent the sort of incidental going in there and sort of to manage that sort of pathway. We reiterate that as in the interim management plan, and again, based on these very conservative values, a short duration of less than 2 hours a time, there is no issue of entering there. But as a precaution, we recommended to fence it off. If someone was to dig, there's a standard PPE, which is personal protective equipment that's recommended, but that would be normal on any maintenance or investigation or excavation program. Option 2 is a surface capping, and I think this is the one that the school and ACT government are looking to pursue. It provides a formal cap that can be managed long-term, and it severs that linkage between the site users and the contamination that's beneath the ground. There was a number of options that we've put there: turfing, synthetic turf, mulch, and various other things. But the thickness, I think, is 300 mils, which is much more significant than what we've recommended. And so it provides a really robust layer and segregation between the soil and the site users. Option 3 was a combination who could put in practice a fencing and a capping option. In terms of the next stages, keep going. Yep. As I said earlier, we are preparing a health risk assessment. This will be due early March. Once it's been peer reviewed, it will need to go through the independent accredited site auditor and the EPA before it can be released. But it's anticipated it will be ready around early March for issue. Our risk assessors wanted to reiterate information that was discussed earlier, that dust inhalation and dermal intake are not a major contribution to exposure of PFAS. The main exposure pathways are drinking and eating PFAS. So the risk from exposure via a soil inhalation and sort of dust pathway is very minimal. Looking at our preliminary results from our health risk assessment, it is suggestive that the screening criteria that we're currently using with the 0.1 milligrams per kilogram would be upgraded to the 2 orders of magnitude higher. So it may be in the 1 to 2 milligrams per kilogram, which would mean that the concentrations that we have on site would not be exceeded. We would be less, you know, the maximum value we've got is 1.2, and the concentration that we're looking at is somewhere between that 1 and 2 bracket. So we really don't think there's an issue long-term from the levels that are present on the site. And after that, we will be confirming the remediation approach that's being worked on at the moment. But that's me. Thank you.
Thank you, Helen. I'm now going to hand over to Michael, who's going to lead the Q&A session. So we did try to respond to the questions that were sent in earlier. If you feel as though your question hasn't been answered, or whether it's raised an additional question for you, now is that time, and then Michael will direct the question to the appropriate person.
Thanks, Leah. So my name is Michael. I do what's called stakeholder engagement or community consultation. I talk to communities about stuff, and it could be about something like PFAS. It could be about building a bridge, and so we're going to have cement trucks driving past your house. It could be a variety of different things. But lately, there's been a fair bit of discussion around PFAS and what it is and what it isn't, and so forth. And so I've been involved in a few projects. So one is defence, but a few others as well. I guess the first question I've got is, what did Helen just say? I really appreciate your patience, because you've sat through this, and I know that your main question is, what's the risk to my kids coming to the school? That's the main question. I've got kids, that's my question. That would be my question. And no offence, Helen, she's a scientist, I'm not, obviously. I'm not a scientist or a doctor. Been involved in this stuff, so I've heard a lot of scientists and doctors talk, and I understand some of what Helen's talking about now because of that. But what I can tell you straight from the outset is we're not here because we think there's any risk to your kids. We're not here to tell you there's a risk to your kids that you need to be concerned about. We're here to be open and transparent about what's been found, and there's a requirement to do something about it because it's a contaminant in the soil. We don't think there's any risk to your kids. I'll just ask that question. Is there anyone that thinks there's a risk to the kids because there's that contaminant in the soil? Speak now. No, okay. So look, so I've been involved in a few projects. I live up near Williamtown, where Defence has sprayed firefighting foam as a training mechanism for years and years and years before they realised that it was an issue. And around Williamtown, people were pumping bore water out of the ground to drink it, and they were feeding their chickens, and they were all that sort of thing. So they had a pathway to ingesting it that was really straightforward. They were just basically drinking and eating. Jervis Bay, swimming in the creek, and or going for bush tucker. So it might be yabbies or it might be shellfish and those sorts of things. They're ingesting it. But here, you know that there's a patch in the soil over here, and you need to eat, 30, 40 grams, something. What do we work out? About 600 grams per week, every week, for there to be considered to be any kind of risk. So I just wanted to say that from the outset because I wanted to allay those concerns that you have as much as I can, because I'm not a scientist, but I have spent a fair bit of time trying to interpret what this all means. And so I personally feel that, yeah, I'm sort of prepared to sort of field your questions. So I won't answer them all. I'll be getting other people to answer them. But I don't have the list of other questions at this point in time, but we'll start with somebody with a question from the audience. Sure.
You mentioned, yep. Yep. Okay. So you mentioned that the locations weren't really quite defined well there. Couldn't really make out where it was. But is the ELC, the proposed location for the ELC, is that a location where there's elevated contaminants there, or?
Leah, you might know the answer to that.
It would be good to see the slide when it comes up. There is a small portion of that site where the new ELC is going to be built that does have a fairly low level of contamination. That said, in order to contain that, what we will be doing is actually excavating significant amounts of that soil. We'll be putting in clean fill, but we'll also, the majority of that contamination is actually going to be contained by the concrete footings that we actually have as part of the site. That is a concern of ours, and that's something that I've been working very closely. Jeff Whitnell has been working very closely with those people with the contractors who we're bringing in to actually remove that soil, but also with the architect and also with our landscape architect as well. So we've been working very closely with them. We are aware that there is contamination there, but it's something that we're actually working to contain completely.
Wouldn't it be better to encapsulate that area if that is a higher sort of area than to excavate it and bring it into the atmosphere sort of thing?
We felt because of the nature of the landscaping that we wanted to do, so that we do have nature play available for the children, we felt that it was actually better to excavate significant amounts of the soil and to remove it from that site, and then to cap it within the other sort of oval area. So we'll, and as we're doing that, that's going to be done in consultation with GHD. We're ensuring that we're following all of those safety measures that they're putting in place. So that's where we're spraying with water. So we're ensuring that those dust particles aren't around, even though I think Helen addressed quite clearly that the way that the PFAS actually gets into our bodies is by ingesting it. So we are working with that very seriously and very closely.
So the test in that location, was that done through the mulch, or was the play equipment part of that test?
It's on. The way we do it is a drill. We put a drill rig. We brought drill rigs onto site, and we take samples all the way down from ground level to as far as we're going. So the samples that we took were within the top 10 centimeters of what's there now. So that's the data that we have, and then we took it at incremental depths as we went down.
The area which I'm sort of concerned with, I've got a son who's plays around in that area, in that playground area, and they sort of, he touches the mulch and then he doesn't wash his hands, he doesn't know any better, and then he has a direct pathway maybe to eat some food. Is there a risk there, or?
So the mulch was put there post when the fire this area was used by the fire brigade. So the likelihood of that having PFAS in it is very small. The way PFAS works is if it's in the ground, it's more likely to go down than up because it leaches and it will travel downwards. Yep.
The locations, so you got quite a few locations there. So all the locations where the fencing is not present, they're safe areas, yeah?
Yes, the data says a below detection limit or below practical quantification from the laboratory. Yeah.
Lady in the yellow just behind.
Hi. Sure. Okay. Sorry, COVID. I'm wondering why, we were first notified in July 2018. You had an EPSD order put on in December 2019. It's now the second. We're February 2021. It's taken this long, to get a community consultation. It's taken this long to get a plan. Where is the remediation? What are you doing about the air that constantly blows with the dust in the children's faces? 8 years worth of schooling is worth, 1,600 days, 1,600 days. I should say that as an accountant. That's a high level of exposure for any child, whether or not you're ingesting it through the wind that blows in their sandwiches. I'm just, you can hear from my emotion in my voice that I'm not really happy with the level of speed that we've been going at ACT government, Catholic Education Office, and GHD reports. It all takes time, but it's 2 years down the track.
Okay, that is a lot of questions. We'll start with the timing, Jeff.
I think what you've seen, the presentation you've seen, and I know you're concerned about the time frame, but it is a comprehensive process and commensurate with the risk involved. So if there was a direct, I suppose, if there was a more direct pathway, then that might warrant a speeding up of that work. I know, for example, we talked about Jarvis Bay. What we did in Jarvis Bay, because there was it was PFAS in a waterway where children were swimming, we took instant action to close the waterway. Here, it's been a little bit slower because the level of risk is so much lower.
Thanks. And Helen, I'll just throw to you with the dust in sandwiches, because it's a very relevant question. And so
we will be looking at that in our risk assessment on the day-to-day and the exposure over the whole duration of a child's life at the school. But based on our risk assessment and all the data that we have, dust is not a major pathway for ingestion, for exposure to PFAS. As Michael pointed out earlier, you need to eat quite a lot of it on a daily basis for it to be an issue. The little bit of dust in the sandwich wouldn't be an issue.
So just to add to that, so I want to talk about Jervis Bay a little bit because I've been exposed to some education around that. Some of the results that came back there were, okay, in this particular creek where there's high levels, we'd rather you didn't swim and we'd rather you didn't drink the water, as an example. In this other area where the level in the water is lower, we're happy for you to eat no more than a couple of fish a week from this area. And in this area, it's something else. So it's looking at what those levels are and then looking at the pathways through. So so what they've talked about, you'd have to eat so much soil on a regular daily basis. I don't know if I'm allowed to say this, but I've heard another person, say, who's got some authority, or like a general, a health person, talk about a half-life for PFAS in your body of being about 7 years. And so it does work through your body, and we're not talking about having very high levels to start with. So it does work through. Now, you might want to check that, that was that emerging science, but it's changing. Another question from the audience. Oh, sorry, this lady here, and then you. Yeah, thank you.
I guess I imagine there's a number of parents who would have, concerns just knowing their own children's activities at the school, knowing how they play. My son in particular lamented when the fence went up because that was his favorite area to play, where they would dig holes, fill it with water, put their water bottles in and drink it because he's an idiot. But that was their favorite game for 3 years, kindy, year 1, year 2. So, I personally am quite concerned that there was that direct pathway of ingestion. What then do I do? Do I monitor him? Can I get his levels tested? What, as a concerned parent, and if other parents are concerned, what is the next move?
All right, so that's one that we would throw to a health practitioner most likely. Jeff, do you want to?
Yeah, I'll just, the Australian government's got a website on PFAS, and that will show you what the what the most recent expert health advice is. Whether or not we had this discussion with firefighters, actually, whether or not we should blood test firefighters, and I know some people have asked that as well. The health advice is it's not a great diagnostic tool because if you get a blood test and you find you've got PFAS in it, that doesn't tell you where the exposure pathway was and whether you're continually being exposed to PFAS or not. And then also because there's no causative link between PFAS presence and a disease. Therefore, what treatment plan would you have anyway, even if you did do that? So that's been our health advice for some time. And that's been our advice to our United Firefighters Union and our firefighters, that there's no diagnostic value in that approach. But as Michael said, it does have a half-life. And so the precautionary principle says avoid the pathways. And so that's why in Jervis Bay, and PFAS operates very differently in different biota. So it hangs around in shellfish a lot, but it doesn't hang around. It doesn't hang around in apples. It hangs around in citrus fruits if it's in the water that grows your citrus fruits. But yeah, it doesn't happen in apples. Hangs around a lot in cows, but not horses. So it's an interesting chemical that reacts quite differently depending on the biota that's involved. So the precautionary principle is limit the exposure.
That's fine. Look, I've got lots of questions, but I think my main sort of question is, look, okay, why would a contractor need to wet the area down and wear PPE if it's so safe, not just for our kids, but I mean the staff are here for longer than the kids generally. Realistically, it seems to me to be a little bit either hypocritical or just missing the real concern. If the big concern is that contractors need to wear all of this protective stuff to be touching the dirt, when theoretically, they need to wear whatever normal safety stuff whenever they're excavating, but extra PPE, wetting the dirt down. Why has the dirt not been wet down if it's been known that would help resolve the issue? It's a dust bowl out there.
I can only go to my experience with construction, and that is that you wet the area down when you're constructing pretty much anything, moving dirt around for dust suppression. But there may well be another answer to that.
I was going to say there was a specific mention of people needing to have PPE in that area.
Yeah, sorry
so
if
it
I,
sounded like it was different to general construction.
No, it was just I probably worded that badly. The PPE that we recommended is standard construction PPE, gloves and steel toe caps and glasses if needs be, if they're working in them. There is nothing anything out of the ordinary. It's standard PPE for a construction site. I haven't said masks. I didn't say masks.
You didn't say
I said-
masks? Okay.
no.
Gloves, we just, like with civil work, you generally don't wear gloves when you're, in an excavator or moving a lawn. Like,
Every health and safety document I've ever read says gloves. I don't know whether they do or don't on site, but it's common.
All right. So this lady has been waiting patiently. We need 2 runners.
I guess my question is for yourself with respect to the blood testing. Is that the ACT government's point of view? Because I know that the federal government does blood testing and has done blood testing at PFAS sites. So is that the ACT government's point of view?
Yeah, I know they have done some at Defence, and I know and the United Firefighters Union in South Australia also did blood testing. But the health advice, which is the ACT government health advice, is that because there's no diagnostic value in it, there's no value in it. So that's our Chief Health Officer's advice.
I do have a question about the dust. I know that you've said that it's not a risk. My son has asthma, and I've actually lost a sister to asthma. So my concern is not just dust in general is a issue for him, but if that dust has stuff on it, is that then become an issue? Because it's not just, breathing it in. He has lung issues as it is. So then on top of that, there's extra stuff in it. So that I just worry about the day-to-day of that. And is there?
Okay. So the asthma is obviously something that you manage on a daily basis, and so the risk for dust for that. Breathing in, and we spoke about this earlier, breathing in dust with PFAS on it, it's not a pathway. So going into your lungs is not a pathway for PFAS to get into your body. You need to eat it. You need to drink it. It needs to go in through your stomach to get into your bloodstream. So that's not an issue that's known. That there's no known knowledge of that. If in 100 years some scientist comes up with something that just please don't track me down, but there's nothing known about that. It's all about eating it and drinking it. So
yes, my name's Dennis Strangman. My 5 children went to the school from 1979 onwards. They're now adults, but this was just 2 years before the fire station was built, and they remember the foam being spread out around the area. They remember going for rides on the fire engines, which was a little bit irrelevant to this, but anyway. And I have a granddaughter currently at the school. So I'm interested in the plans, and I'm interested in particularly about remediation. And I know that mulch was mentioned as a possibility, which seems to me to be a very low level type of remediation. I think a lot of parents and a lot of people like myself who are grandparents and that would not be happy unless all the contaminated soil was removed. Now, do you agree with that, or do your experts agree with it? Or is that not on the agenda at all? So anyway, I'd like an answer.
So that's the question. Just on your earlier comments, yeah, we've anecdotally around the place, when people in defence were promoted from one rank to another, I've heard stories about how they used to get, bathed in this stuff as a kind of a ritual. You got promoted to some rank or other, so we're spraying this stuff on you as a thing, as part of a gag, if you like. Back in the day, fireys might have sprayed it around and to show kids what the fire engine did and all that sort of thing. The irony is that this chemical was created to save lives and property, and it was a fantastic chemical because it didn't break down very well, because it encapsulated material that was going to burn and all that sort of thing. So that's the irony of it. To your point about the remediation, and this is probably one for Helen, so I walk over to her. But the main thing that I heard was they're putting a geosynthetic liner and then a foot of dirt, which is topsoil, which will then be grassed. So it'll add another foot of separation, if you like. But did you want to mention something else?
Yeah, at this stage, there's no plans to remove any soil other than beneath the Early Learning Centre and move it away, and then it will be encapsulated. There will be a geogrid to provide a physical sort of observable barrier over the soil, and then there's a 300 mil topsoil layer going on top. The site will be long-term managed and it will be reviewed constantly to make sure that none of that geogrid is ever exposed. So it's a long-term management plan associated with that because it's not removing all of it. There is one area in question that we may choose to remove at some point, but that depends on the results of our risk assessment, and it is that the highest location that we've observed. There is a potential that that will be removed and disposed off-site, but at this stage there is no plans.
Yeah, okay, so we've got a couple from up the back that are coming through online, and then this lady.
Thanks, everyone. We have 20 people online with us participating, so thank you to them. There is two questions that I'm going to combine because they are on a very similar topic. Will there be precautions taken while excavation is underway so PFAS doesn't become airborne? And will kids, especially current ELC children, be there or present on days excavation is taking place?
All right, so I think we've heard the answer to the first one. So that's going to be done, and there'll be a water truck there to manage dust and that sort of thing. And then the second one was, will the kids be around the ELT during the construction or during, yes? Excavation. Okay, Jeff.
Yeah, so the ELC construction would be treated like any other building project we're doing on the site. Just going back to, I think, one of the earlier questions, the area identified with the low levels of contamination overlap the new ELC area, I think by about 6 or 7 square metres in the very corner. But the playground area that we're proposing to install as part of the new ELC, that's the area where we're going to remove some material because it's going to be a more creative playground space. So we want to have, you know, little dry creek beds and things and opportunities for kids to actually you know, play in the ground there. So that's why we want to remove and bring in a whole lot of new fresh soil around that area.
All right, one more from the...
Yes, another question. Associate Professor Robert Niven's recent emerging grant to conduct research into PFAS found in soil via airborne consumption is of concern for our children's health. Can we have a comment, please?
I can give you one, but if anyone else would like to make... Okay. So media practice is to find somebody else to comment, but what I've heard so far is that he hasn't seen the reports and didn't know what the levels were and all that sort of thing. So I think you can generally take that comment as saying the precautionary principle is to limit, you know, PFAS exposure to PFAS. Any more than that, then we'd need to understand what the context was and what the information is that the professor, the good professor, is speaking from, you know, where he got his information from.
Look, and I do apologize. I've read lots of the stuff when it's come out at the time, and I'm probably just glossing over this. Given that there are obviously acceptable or allowable levels of it, and given the understanding from tonight that it actually really isn't dangerous and it really doesn't matter, I'm quite curious, what actually does it do? If there's no medical conditions that are traced to it, why are there allowable and non-allowable levels?
You were going to start. I think it's a very persistent chemical, and so that it hangs. So it's an environmental contaminant in that it hangs around for a long period of time, and so that's sort of that's the environmental concern, that it's a contaminant that just hangs around. When you read the expert panel advice, it does say that there's certainly no causative, and there's some emerging science that there may be a correlation between that, and I think the only one that they've pinned it on is later onset of menstruation is the only one where this sort of the Australian Health Expert Panel has seen a possible correlation between long-term PFAS exposure and that. So again, I encourage you to go to the Australian Health website because that's got the most up-to-date health advice on that.
Yeah, and it's basically that precautionary principle for mine is that even though they just, the general advice is try and limit your exposure to it. And it's an emerging contaminant. So there's so little. You've got some of it back?
Sorry, a point of clarification has come through just in relation to the days of excavation taking place. The question was, will children be on site and during the excavation process or the building taking place? The preference would be school holidays, etc., but they're just wondering if they could have a comment.
At this stage, we're mindful that we're all keen to get on with the building project to start with, the ELC, which has probably been delayed a little bit because of what we're working through in terms of the other work. So we're combining the encapsulation of the oval with the same civil contractor who's going to do the work for the building to try and sort of fast track that element of it. So at this stage, given that our advice is there's no specific risk apart from general dust created when you're doing any sort of building works, then we're anticipating school will operate as normal. The building site would be fenced off and shielded and separated as any other building site would normally be.
Obviously, at the times when the heaviest amounts of dust are going to be in the air, the ELC educators and teachers will minimise children's exposure to that dust. So there might be more occasions for inside play. The excavation won't be going for weeks. It won't be going for a long period of time. And so we will be looking at how do we minimise that for the children at the time. Obviously, the wetting down of the dust, it's something that normally happens when there are large amounts of, when there is excavation anyway. So that is going to minimise the dust, but we certainly will assess the situation at the time. As principal of the school, as somebody who works here on site, day after day, I'm certainly not going to expose the children here at the site to any additional risk. That's something that I'm absolutely committed to. I went into this because I care for children and I enjoy working with children. So there's no way on earth I'm going to expose them to any known risk. I'm certainly not going to expose my staff to any known risk. I take their health very, very seriously. And so that's something I am absolutely committed to. So know that if we do note that there are huge amounts of dust that are being thrown up into the air and we're not able to manage that, and I'm confident that we will be able to manage that. But if we're noting that that's what's happening, then of course we're going to keep the children inside, just as we keep them inside when it's too hot, just as we keep them inside when it's too smoky. We're always going to protect the health of every person who is on this site.
One more point.
Can I just add? Sorry, we've been mentioning excavation, but in fact, where the new building levels are set, the actual excavation of the ground is very minimal. We're actually going to be bringing in a fair bit of material to get the levels up where the new building's going. So the practical amount of excavation is going to be quite minimal.
Just wondering if there are any intentions to release the reports that have been commissioned.
Look, we provided a lot of info tonight, and once the reports are finalised, yeah, there's no problem with that. I think what we have done in the past, and I'll use another example where we had multiple bore, and I explained this to Ross the other day, but another part of Canberra, we had multiple bores, and everyone wanted to know their own bores, but they didn't want anyone else to know what was in their neighbour's bores. So we released the results only to the site, well, sorry, I suppose the contaminated leaseholder. If I think of the former fire station at Forest, that's the government site, and we've released the results around that. So we're still in the finalisation, but you would have seen we are being open and transparent, and Helen took us through a lot of the details today.
Two microphones. Happy
Yes,
days.
hi there. Look, I just wanted to firm up the idea of wetting the soil. Is it just to stop the dust going around, or is there genuinely any risk of particles in terms of aggravating asthma or other things with children? Because it does still sound, to be honest, like there is a risk during excavation.
Okay.
And the second thing is, if that is the case, you and other panel members, would you be comfortable with your own children being at the school during that process? And again, what assurances can we take away from this that there is no genuine risk? Because it does sound like, yes, we need to wet the soil, but then we're still saying there is no risk.
Okay, so what I've heard and what I truly believe is that the excavation and the building of this new building, risk is exactly the same as any other building in Australia. And the management of dust is the same as any other construction site. The asthma issue is real. If someone's got asthma and is exposed to a lot of dust, then clearly there's a risk there and that needs to be managed. But apart from that, it's just the same. No other difference at all. Anyone want to add anything? Yes, everybody. Everyone.
Yeah, so I think the wetting down is just standard construction procedure. Going to your earlier point, I've been in and around PFAS for a few years now, and I do have children. If they were yabby hunting in Jervis Bay, I would tell them not to eat it. If they were eating a kilo of dirt a day, whether it was PFAS contaminated or not, I'd tell them not to eat that too. But I think I do trust the science, and we have looked at it, and where we had crops growing, where bores were being used. When I went and visited that landholder, I said, please do not keep topping up your swimming pool with the bore water. You know, you shouldn't be doing that anyway, but don't do it. So I suppose what I'm saying is I would look at the risk, and I'd be comfortable with my children coming to this school. One of being too old for this school now, but only just. But yes, I think if you look at it with a scientist and trust the science, yeah, I wouldn't see a problem here. I wouldn't eat yabbies in a creek in Jervis Bay. So that's where I'm at.
Can I just add in relation to the main issue I see in terms of managing the construction is the extent of area that we're going to be sort of leveling out and returfing, and the amount of material, dirt and soil and that we're going to be bringing in is quite extensive. And so if you had a windy sort of day from the west, then you would get a huge amount of dust potentially blowing across the school. So that's really the main driver for containing or managing the dust with the water spray. As we've heard, that's not a risk with the PFAS. It's more of a risk around managing kids with asthma and things like that. So that's such a large volume of material we're going to be doing. Yeah.
Thank you. And another one online too.
It's an online question. Timeline for remediation. Is it a significant, it's a significant percentage of the playground that can't be utilised? Are we looking at months in terms of timeline?
Jeff, that's probably a question to you. What's the time frame?
Yes, at least. Sorry, yeah. So one thing we're doing to try and fast track this, as I think Leah might have indicated before, we've already engaged a civil contractor directly to help us with the encasement of the area. We've decided to issue them the documentation for the component of work with the building as well. So we've got one civil contractor doing all that work together. We do have to get formal sign-off. Jeffrey has to go through some formal sign-off in terms of the detailing. At some point, you know, we're probably going to be requesting some assistance for some of the cost of doing the basic remediation as well. So we've got to get formal sign-off from government on those things. There will be wet weather. There's no doubt. We'd be really reluctant to try and say, look, it's going to be done in 3 months. You know, we're trying to fast track it as much as we can. We've already met a couple of times with GHD. We're meeting again probably with them next week to try and finalise the detailing in terms of exactly how we manage some of the excavation and trenching work and things like that. So I'd be really reluctant to try and put a time on it, albeit to say we're mindful that Leah's under pressure, obviously, because you know, 2/3 of the playground is going to be out of action for a while. Yeah.
I'll just, sorry, Leah. I'll just say the other thing that the ACT government, we didn't want to put a contractor on site, do a set of remediation work and then deliver a different product later. So we think the streamlined approach is for one civil contractor, and you end up, I suppose the upgrades that the school was doing will be supported by the ACT government with the remediation that we needed to occur. I'm certain that if we did the remediation, it would take longer, and then we do the capping, and then later the school would want to do further upgrades, and then the ovals will be out of action for even longer. So we are working together to do it as fast as possible.
So one of the things that we had wanted to do even before we knew that there was PFAS contamination was to irrigate the oval and to actually level out the ovals, to put in some tree cover, to really bring it up to a standard that I think the community deserves. And so when we were starting with the conversations with the ACT government, when we were talking to Jeff, you know, I'd mentioned that this is what we were wanting to do. And we talked about whether we could put irrigation in, and that was one of the big things that we wanted to put in, which is why we did engage Paul Barnett as the landscape architect to actually help us to not only remediate the site, but also to hand back a facility I think that the students will absolutely love. So part of that remediation that we're doing is going to be, we're going to produce 3 level ovals, and you can see the plans up there with tree cover. That's going to be part of our master plan. So this will be the first part of that plan, and part of that is, a large part of that is funded by ACT government as part of the remediation. The other component of that is actually going to be funded by Catholic Education, because knowing that we haven't been with the facility for such a long time, Catholic Education are committed to giving us back something that's going to be much better than we've always had. So I think while the timeline is actually stretching out, it's stretching out because what we want to do is to have something that's going to really last into the long term. Now, I wish I could wave a magic wand. I wish I could, you know, have it back in an instant, and I wish I could give you an absolute time frame as to, you know, say, okay, you know, on the, you know, beginning of term 2, we're going to have this great facility, but I can't do that. There are just so many factors in place. But do know that we are committed to returning the playground to the students as soon as we can. And we're working very, very hard. We're working very, very quickly to try and return that as soon as we can. But there are a whole range of factors that we have to, you know, that we have to be at play. And some of those can only go as fast as they can go.
Thanks, Leah. We've got one online and then over to my left. We good? All right, thank you. All right, got one in the middle here.
Thanks for all coming this afternoon too. It's greatly appreciated. Why did the Fiery stop using it in 2005?
Okay, my quick science-less answer is that they found out that it was one of these chemicals that doesn't break down readily and is bioaccumulative. And that's the same reason that Defence stopped using it and others stopped using it. And basically the use of those chemicals in firefighting foams has been phased out across the globe. Does that answer? Yep, okay. Any more questions? Sorry, okay. And then over here.
Thank you. My question, I feel a bit nervous to ask this, but following on from that firefighter question, my limited knowledge of PFAS and it being dangerous is because of firefighters getting sick. Coming about now, it'll be, and a loose tie of, is it from PFAS chemicals? Everything we've talked about tonight is our kids ingesting it. I can't picture firefighters ingesting these foams. So how would they have been, what exposure would they have that would be linking to them illnesses now that's obviously causing concern in the community of these chemicals?
All right, this is where we need a physician or someone with knowledge of the health side of things. I'm personally not aware of firefighters getting sick, as you've mentioned, but this lady here is. We talk about accidental ingestion and things like that. So, for example, Teflon fry pans, I've got PFAS in my system from Teflon or from wearing a Gore-Tex jacket or something like that, or from eating prawns from the Hunter River, for example, that sort of thing. So we talk about accidental ingestion, but I'm not sure about other ways, pathways. No, I'm sorry. So that's one we'll have to sort of put to health people to come back, and I can see two people typing and writing those. So that's something that we'll have to come back to you with. That was the question in a nutshell. Yeah. Okay. All right. Thank you. Sure. No, it's for the audio. It's for the online.
What you touched on before was your fry pans and all that sort of stuff, and paint and all the other things you've mentioned. Scotch guarding and all that sort of thing. DuPont was dragged through the courts, wasn't it, recently for this sort of stuff?
Is it 3M?
Was it 3M? Is that the same sort of stuff?
Yes.
It is. Same sort of stuff as this?
Yeah, it's a large number of chemical compounds that makes up that group called PFAS. And yeah, that's right. So the United States company.
And even your own words here, it doesn't pose a potential risk to human health unless they're absorbed by consuming contaminated water or food. Person would have to repeatedly eat large amounts of contaminated soil, water or food to produce elevated levels of PFAS within their system. If it's elevated, what does it do to your system? Like, a quick Google search there, and Dr. Google doesn't answer all questions, but some quite alarming things there. Like, if it wasn't a problem, we wouldn't be here. So what do these elevated levels do to your body?
Yeah, and that's the $64 question. Obviously, it doesn't cause you to, spontaneously explode or anything. It's not as bad as if you drank a liter of alcohol or, that sort of thing. You can see that there's been a lot of research done on things like cigarettes and skin cancer and all those things over time. There's been a lot of research done over many, many decades to tell you that you shouldn't drink 3 bottles of scotch in a night, you probably die. You shouldn't drink petrol, all these different things. But with PFAS, it's an emerging contaminant, which means we haven't known about it for very long. And although there's a lot of research being done right now, there's not a lot of background research and knowledge known. And so that's why they've come up with these precautionary guidelines. And they've said, generally try to reduce your exposure to it. So we don't know. And the other thing that's been said is there's no definitive link between having it in your system and any health impacts. So, I'm just quoting other people and things that I've read. That's the answer. They don't know. They're still working on it, but while they're working on it, let's be precautious and let's not go, exposing ourselves to it unnecessarily. So it's a case of, in 10 years' time, they might have more to tell. But there's lots of health people and researchers working on this sort of thing.
Just interested in the actual construction sequence and the detail of what's actually going to happen. So it's going to be, can correct me if I'm wrong, is it a geotech material which is going on top of the existing grass, or you're doing a site scrape and then putting the geotech material down and then putting the topsoil on top? Because I'm just mindful of that you're saying the contaminants are in the top 100 mil or thereabouts of the soil. If you site scrape, which I don't know if you are or not, is that you just going straight on top? Okay, great.
Yeah, just briefly. So that's the guideline GHD have indicated. So we'll cut the grass down, and then the marker membrane goes on directly on top of that. And that's why we want to bring in a reasonable amount of material so we can level out, and have nice level areas for playing, and there's little mounds and swales and planting's going to be done. So yeah.
I guess it's just the trenching of any services or irrigation lines, which will be below that geotech material.
Yeah, so we're anticipating we'll be building up enough material for the oval areas that we want to irrigate, that the pipework will literally just run in on top of the marker layer as well. There will be we will have a little bit of trenching to do in the footings for the new ELC building, obviously. So there'll be, footings there. There'll probably be some trenching for services as well. Although, as I said, there's only about 6 square metres that's in the defined area, still some of it. The advice, we're going to be working again closely with GHD, who'll remain involved during the project, and any of that material we'll leave on site, but it'll be encased as well.
I think just the reticulations of the main line of the irrigation system will most definitely be in that area, which is contaminated. And
yeah, so if there are, and there might well be, a couple of main trenches that we have to put in, we'll work with GHD to establish what's the safest way to do that. Yeah.
I know the drawings that we've received already from Paul Barnett actually have quite detailed plans on how we encase those areas where we will have to trench. And there will be a geotextile. I think in the plans, it actually shows that there is a geotextile that will encapsulate that area. So even where we're planting trees, we're actually looking at encasing that. The drawings that I've seen they're very detailed. I mean, this is just a plan, I think, so that you can see what's going to happen, but the actual detail is being passed through to GHD, and GHD will look at that at every step of the way, or at those milestones, to make sure that what we're doing is actually fully encapsulating any PFAS that is on site.
Thanks, Leah. We've got one up the back, an online question.
Yes, this is a good forum. Will there be another forum ahead, and will there be ACT health officials available or researchers in ACT regarding PFAS to answer the more specific health questions?
I'm not sure whether we'll have another forum. If the community wants another forum, I'm happy to have that. All the questions that we've taken on notice or we haven't had an answer for, we will do. Public health is ramping up, as you know, and our health specialist, our non-COVID health specialist, is actually starting next week. So a fact of timing. So we'll get back to you. I've got copious amounts of notes, so we'll have those answers. And if you think another forum is required, we'll have another forum. If you've got any further questions, please shoot them through via the school. And we'll send them to the Chief Health Officer and get that further questions answered.
Did we mention earlier that this is being recorded? Because it is being recorded. It's being recorded, so if there's people that couldn't make it today or couldn't get online, they can listen to us blathering on at their leisure. And then if they've got any questions that come from that, they can ask those questions directly through the school contacts, emails, and so on. I'll ask again if there are any other more questions. We've got a couple of online, did you say? Okay, we've got another one over here.
Hi, just one further question. Just in the interim period, obviously there's going to be a lot of remediation work happening. Is there a way of fast tracking some of the amenity improvements for the kids, like some additional seating, tables, that kind of area? Obviously the blacktop can be still used to kind of, again, produce a bit more space for the kids to play in the interim.
No one wants to answer that. That's a hard. I'm not answering that.
Yeah, that's a challenging one. I think, as I said earlier, we are monitoring. I think the improvements that we will have to the site are considerable. Look, I would love it if we could do that, but I can't. I don't have authority to commit to that.
Is there anyone in the room that does have authority to mention?
But look. I think what we do have at the moment is sufficient. So we have. We have ensured that we do have enough square meters for children to play in, and there's more than enough. If we're finding that, because we do know we've got kids who love to run around, we do have an area adjacent to the church that we have access to as well, if that's something that we find that we need. To date, we haven't found that we've needed that. The children have been incredibly cooperative. They've been playing very, very well, and they've actually been celebrating it. So when we have our shout outs, and the staff would be familiar with this, and some of the parents, whenever we have our shout outs, it's often about And I want the 2 football games, children playing the 2 football games on the back oval to stand up because they're all being respectful of one another. They're all playing. They weren't interfering with each other's games. And so at the moment, that level of cooperation is actually being celebrated. I am mindful of time.
But that said, if we're not leaving until we've answered all your questions. Well, I'm not anyway. Yes.
Rachel, just a couple of points and then I'll ask my question. I think you made the point earlier on that inhalation wasn't a pathway. It is. EPA New South Wales says that it is. It is a low risk though. So.
Okay, so when I'm saying inhalation, I'm saying through your lungs as opposed to inhaling it in and then ingesting it into your stomach. That was the difference I was making.
But yeah, just in case there's any confusion about dust.
I'm not a doctor.
Dust, PFAS on dust can be a pathway through inhalation. The issue of timing, I think the timing is frustrating that you look at the first testing on the fire station site was 2015. We're now in 2021 and we still haven't undertaken the health risk assessment. So I think that was expressed earlier on. I think it's a general frustration of why it's taken so long. The question was in relation to risk. We've talked about risk to staff, risk to students, that no one wants to put them at risk. My question is, when was the risk assessment completed and who completed it?
So there's a human health risk assessment which hasn't been completed yet.
Yeah, so we're in the process of doing a human health risk assessment at the moment. It will then be peer reviewed by the auditor and the EPA and will be issued in due course. Everything that we've provided advice on is based on a published criteria for a residential scenario at this stage. So that is the risk assessment we've done, and it's based on a very conservative number. But right now, as we speak, we have a team working on a site-specific risk assessment, which you will be given the information in due course.
So yes, that's another not yet, and it'll take time to happen, but it'll be done professionally and you'll be given the results.
So just confirming there has been no risk assessment to date, because I think there was a temporary fence put across part of the oval. I think it was some years ago. I can't remember when it was put in. But I think if you look at site B126, which is the highest concentration in the soil, it's not within that zone. So someone at some stage thought that a mitigation to potential risk in close proximity to the fire station was to put up temporary fencing, but it appears that that fencing wasn't in the area that created the highest concentration. So at some stage, someone's made some decisions along the way of how to mitigate risk, but you're telling me there has been no risk assessment for 6 years.
So I think by the timescales that I understand, the investigation that was done back then is when the EPA became involved and the order was put to ACT government, and then ACT government engaged us to continue that process of investigation. So it's a staging rather than a risk assessment approach. The staging was undertaken, the EPA became involved, and then there's been a procurement process, and then we came involved at the earliest opportunity. To that, is that correct?
I think there was a question about the smaller fenced section where the higher concentration was discovered and the timing of that fencing.
Yeah, so the fencing was put in place there based on the results of that investigation. At the time, the extent of the investigation didn't cover the entire playing fields. It came up, I think, sort of halfway through, and based on the results that they found at that time, that was the area of highest risk based on the concentrations that they identified at the time.
So my layman's description of that is they started looking at where the fire station was first, and they found some things, and then they did some more extensive investigations later, and then they found some more things, and then so the finding of that closer spot, when was that known?
2018, I think. It was on my presentation. I think it's 2018. Oh, sorry, we're talking about, I think you're talking about the original rectangle right next to the, the very small section. Sorry, which
small
area?
section with a high reading.
I was actually talking about both.
Okay.
That at some point, someone decided that the risk mitigation for exposure was to put a fence up along the line of the fire station on the far side.
Yep.
And then more recently, there's
Yep.
been another fence.
Yep.
But I think ironically, where the fence was put up originally wasn't the site of the highest concentration. That was
No.
closer to the school proper.
Yes, it was unusual to find that location there, but it's been, because it's an iterative process, it's taken some time to realise that it was over a wider area.
And so when did you find out about the highest concentration speed, that little
August
spot?
2020.
August.
Yeah. Yes.
Okay. And so the reason that wasn't seen was because it was nowhere near the fire station, and
Yeah.
there's reason to believe that maybe there was a practice area where they set fire to things and then trained and all that, but it was away from the fire station. And it was like, oh, right, surprise. That was August last year. Other questions? Anything else online coming through that we haven't spoken to? Sorry, should have brought your joggers.
There are coming through quite a number of comments that aren't direct questions. So we're going to take those on notice and keep a copy of those for future communications. There is one question about the cooperation from children that Leah mentioned after 4 days. Is there a plan for our kids to be able to play and run weeks and months into remediation?
Yeah, so as I said, the space that we have available is sufficient based on the amount of space that we need to have available per child for the number of children who we have on site. The play space is sufficiently large, and we've looked into that. We will continue to monitor it. If we do find that the children do need additional space to play, then we do have the offer of some of that additional space over near the church. But as I said, the children are playing well. It doesn't seem to be overcrowded. We do have additional staff out on duty, so you'll see in that space supporting children with that. And at this stage, and I would expect that going into the future and the coming months, that the children will continue to play in a really respectful way, and will continue to enjoy the space that they have. And I suspect we'll start to look at that remediation. So as we start to build, and we know that children become very excited as new things start to come into the playground, we expect that we might have a few kids peering in to see what's changed since they saw that site last. So the children will also be engaged in that process of the remediation as well. So one of the reasons why we are using Paul Barnett is because he does do a lot of community consultation around what the community would like to have as part of their playground. And he does a huge amount of consultation with the children as well. So not only will this be an opportunity for the children to have a beautiful new playground, it'll also be an opportunity for them to learn about why do we use swales? Why do we use trenches? Why do we do this where we plant trees? What sorts of things would you like to have as part of your playground? And as part of the master plan, we'll also be looking at things like a dry creek bed. We'll be looking at areas for frogs. We'll be looking at some outdoor classroom spaces as well. So that's going to be, I think, something where the children will be engaged and something that they're going to be excited about.
Sorry, last question from online. We have a child who is also in the Ducklings daycare. So on top of the questions around a health risk assessment being done, was there one done for that site? It's a question for the ACT government. And would you like to take that on notice or address it now?
Well, that's totally capped. Everything that's on that site is totally capped, and that's for it to become a childcare centre, we needed to do that. So that's all synthetic, either synthetic or a hard capping already. So as we've said a few times, the best thing that you can do when you have PFAS soil is make sure that you cover it. So under road base is very good, under synthetic turf, which was mentioned here, or under all the treatment that we're doing here, but it's so it doesn't get disturbed. So yeah, the childcare centre remains fully capped.
Thank you. Other questions from the floor? All right. And any other questions online? Nothing? All right. Well, look, thank you for your patience. Thank you for your civility and manners in this process. Hope that that's at least allayed most of your fears, some of your fears. If you've got other questions, concerns, this is the beginning of the conversation. It's not the end. If you've got anything else that you want to talk about, please do that. The school and the system and the government are keen to allay any further concerns and keep you in the loop with what's going on. So this is here to be an open and transparent process. So we want to continue that dialogue over time. Look forward to the time when that new playground and ELC is up and running and fabulous. Until then, there's some work to be done. And so I hope that you embrace that change and that improvement to the school over time. Again, thanks very much for coming. If you've got any questions that you didn't want to ask out loud, we're staying here until we've answered those questions. If you've got anything else that you want to throw at us. But until we'll let you go now and enjoy the rest of your evening. And yeah, as I say, so again, if anything comes up, if you want to look at the video, the recording, if anything comes to mind, please don't hesitate. We'd rather you vented, told us of your displeasure, asked the question, gave us some different arguments for us to consider and so on, but don't stew on it. Please engage with us in the process, and when we can all learn and grow from this process, as we all have today. Thanks very much for your time. Thank you. Good evening.